What is going on, y'all? KMBest here. I just got done finishing my entire Infinite climb and playing some games in Infinite with Goliath only. Let's talk about this new fascinating addition to the ongoing archetype and what it's doing right now and maybe what the future holds for it. Goliath is a 2-1 with an ongoing ability that makes him bigger for every other ongoing card you have on the board. While many other synergy pieces in Marvel's Snap have been released and then we quickly discover that they aren't supposed to be played with all of the cards they go with, they are instead supposed to be used as a small package in a good stuff deck, this is not that. You are only playing Goliath if you are playing like conservatively 9 or 10 ongoings in your deck. This is a card that goes in ongoing decks, which means it has fairly limited homes. It's going to go in decks with lots of ongoings, not some ongoings, not a couple, a few, lots of ongoings. You are incredibly encouraged to invest into ongoings just by this card existing, because if you are not hyper invested into ongoings, there's not really a reason to play it over something like Lizard or a tech piece like Gorgon or Kate Bishop. You need to be very invested in ongoings to actually make this make sense. It's not good enough as a small package card to be in everything. This is not a Sam Wilson. This is not an Iron Patriot. This is not a Kate Bishop. I think it is much more similar to something like Wiccan or Speed, where it is an archetype build around rather than something that you will see in a wide variety of decks. And I think the Wiccan Speed comparison it's pretty interesting because I think it's somewhere between Wiccan and Speed, whereas for Wiccan, you definitely need him if you want to play a Wiccan deck. For Speed, it's like, he's pretty good, but there's a couple other cards that you can maybe play instead, like Rocket and Gruder Copycat, that aren't going to, like, hurt you horribly unless there's additional ongoing synergy. And so he's somewhere in between that, is what I'm trying to get at here. He's not as required for ongoing decks as Wiccan is for Wiccan decks or Anti-Venom for Anti-Venom decks. There are still a lot of other things that ongoing decks are able to do without him, but he is a very clear inclusion in those decks. This is a card that is going to make the 12 of every ongoing deck for the foreseeable future. He just is going to do that. In terms of replacements for Goliath in whatever deck you're playing, I think there are a couple of good options. There's Lizard, if you want a card that is actually not terrible when your opponent enchantresses it. It's a 2/6, it's pretty good. And of course, there is also Gorgon if you're looking for some disruption. Both of those as ongoings are pretty solid for you to have. This is a good card. I want to start with that. This is a good card. It will be in a bunch of ongoing decks. If you are the kind of person who thinks that they are going to be playing ongoing decks, and also the kind of person who can't really abide playing like a slightly worse version of a deck, you're probably going to want to pick this guy up. He is, to me, just a very clearly good card in the decks that he goes in. Whether those decks end up metagame viable, I think that's an open question. It's certainly dependent on the meta, and I think a lot of people are reacting to what I think you could reasonably describe as an ongoing renaissance by playing a lot of Enchantress, which certainly muddies the waters for this guy. But the baseline power is high. This is a strong card. It is pretty obviously strong, and it is probably best in slot in the decks that it goes in. So what the hell are those decks? This is the list that I started with for Goliath. It's just very clearly, straightforwardly good. I have always had a bit of a soft spot for decks like this. The half-man, half-amazing shell, the Luke Cage anti-venom stuff. Someone asked me what my comfort cards were in Marvel Snap a while ago. Anti-Venom is definitely one of them, and so this is a deck that really speaks to me in that way. However, while playing it, a couple of things really stuck out to me. The first is that you are extremely vulnerable to Enchantress with this deck, and there's really no way around that. I mean, there is a way around that. It's called Cosmo, but you have fairly limited tech slots. The second is that I really wasn't playing a lot of Spectrum. I honestly kind of wonder if I could cut Spectrum for Cosmo, because right now, Super Skrull is really, really good, and winning those mirrors because a lot of people are playing Captain Carter, a lot of people are playing Goliath, with your Super Skrull is pretty important, whereas Spectrum felt like she was rarely actually doing a lot in a world where a lot of people were playing stuff like this, which can go so tall that her buffs don't even really matter. This is an interesting thing to think about going forward for this list. In terms of play pattern, one of the things you'll notice is that when you do have a 2-drop, especially Sam Wilson, you are going to have a much better time when playing this list than the alternative. There are a couple of things that you're going to want to think about when you're positioning your units. The first is you typically don't want Sam Wilson in the middle because you want to be able to have both him off of the middle and his shield off of the middle, where the middle is typically the best place to play a Moonstone because that is the place that lets you double up on Mr. Fantastic the most effectively. There are, of course, contextual situations in which you will not want to do that. Another important aspect of this deck is the ability to discount the cards with 0 power very drastically thanks to Ravonna Renslayer and Moonstone. This is a powerful interaction that allows you to do explosive final turns with really large numbers of points. Finally, there are a couple of weird interactions that are worth talking about. The first one is good for you. If you Mystique an Iron Man, and that Mystique is under a Moonstone, you will then have 2 Iron Men, effectively, because the Moonstone will copy the Mystique. Problem. If you try to Mystique a Super Skrull under a Moonstone, it just straight up doesn't work. I lost games to that. I didn't realize it was like that until I had a couple of shots at it, and yeah, you cannot have a Super Skrull, even if the Mystique by all rights should be copied by the Moonstone, it just straight up doesn't work. They were like, we can't have that interaction work for whatever technical limitation reasons. It does not work. So, TLDR, Mystiquing everything else under a Moonstone, great, you get 2 of it. Mystiquing Super Skrull under a Moonstone does not work, even though Mystique is 3 and should work. It just straight up doesn't. One of the things that really stood out playing the previous deck was just how bad Enchantress is for it. And I think if you're worried about being Enchantress, the Doom 2099 Spectrum Shell is much more able to handle that. It's not perfect. It can't perfectly handle being Enchantress, but it's way, way better into that card. And so that is a meaningful reason why this could be a better metagame decision if you're looking for a Goliath deck to play than the alternative. Even though I personally enjoy playing the other list more, I think it has become pretty clear to me that everyone is starting to get pretty freaking prepared for what you can do. Not only is this list better into Enchantress, it's also better into Super Skrull because your Super Skrulls are not, their Super Skrulls are not getting a bunch of Iron Men when you're playing this deck. They're just getting like some Doombot procs a lot of the time. This deck is meaningfully worse than it used to be, but it still can put out a decent amount of power. Its good draws are still very unique, and I think the way you should probably think about it is sort of like the Sandman deck, except without really any stopping your opponent from doing anything. All you're doing is just points on the board. A lot of points on the board. Your really good draws involve Sam and Cap into a great late game. Those are very, very powerful and very, very difficult to deal with. In terms of specific interactions, I will say Doom 2099, it's like way more important to get him out early than it used to be. Turn 4 Doom 2099 now, it's like respectable, but it used to be amazing. Now it's like, all right, it's like okay. I will also say that Captain Carter is not likely to be the best in slot option here. It's more something to try. She does go with this kind of strategy very well. There are real upsides to it, but she ends up being pretty dependent on either getting like Zabooed or getting buffed by, of course, Captain America or Spectrum. It's not awful, and it can go a bit of the way towards making up the Doom 2099 stuff, but it is like, You're in a good spot if you doom 2099 on 3 into Captain Carter on 4, and then you're starting to roll downhill. But other than that, I didn't really find a lot of use for her. She's undeniably like fairly strong, and she'll be the topic of the next video on this channel. But I don't think that she fits into what the metagame is about right now, or at least I think maybe she's been a little pigeonholed in ongoing archetypes, and maybe she has some potential elsewhere with like Galacta or Gwenpool or something. I'm not entirely sure, but the basic thing I'm trying to get across here is this one is better into Enchantress because it is a Doom 2099 deck, although I think long term it is probably a worse deck. I've been playing this build of Goliath Thanos from Derek. I really enjoyed it. It's a very fun thing to do right now, in part because Thanos has already been pretty good recently, right? Like, this is a shell that is pretty damn solid. Goliath is shockingly good in Thanos because I don't think people have paid too much attention, but so many of the stones have gained ongoing abilities that didn't necessarily have them in the first place. In fact, there are going to be games where most of Goliath's points are just from the stones. And he's just a very solid card here. You're able to use him in the context of being a very excellent just stat stick, while also throwing it back to a type of deck that I honestly never thought I would see again at a high level. And that is, of course, the old Spectrum Thanos. This is the throwback of throwbacks. I'm not even sure it was ever good in the first place way back in the day, but people did play it. This is the first time I've ever looked at a Spectrum Thanos list and been like, you know what? I think this is actually pretty good. I think there's stuff this deck can do that a lot of other Thanos decks can't do. And I think having the relevant tech is a really powerful thing. There are some downsides to being a Thanos list, namely that you, when your good draws are happening, are very forward on clogging the board. So when you're drawing a lot of stones, but you don't have Sam Wilson, you can put yourself in awkward spots because you might not be able to use your board spaces efficiently. You can use a lot of energy efficiently, but your board spaces are a limiter in themselves. So when you're playing this deck, the thing I want you to consider is, how do I optimize for the most power on the board on the final turn of the game? Sometimes you're gonna have to make hard choices in a deck like this. Locations may force you to have less space than usual. You'll have to choose between whether or not you're gonna be able to proc Wiccan, or will that even matter? And I think that kind of stuff is what makes you a better player, and that is the mindset you should probably have when you approach this. I know it sounds obvious a little bit to talk about, oh, well, just make sure you have the most points at the end of the game, but you got to plan ahead to make sure that happens. So please do plan ahead when you play this list, or you will wind up clogging yourself and running out of space despite having a ton of energy. I want to be clear. I do think Goliath probably goes in this deck long term. I think it probably makes sense. This is an alternate of a list that I believe Cougar was playing about a month ago, where it was just like gore tribal. The goal here is basically to scam people with gore. Now, the reason I have parenthetical not right now is it's basically never been worse to be a gore deck. This is a deck that you file away for the future and you do not play right now because everyone is playing ongoings. Gore is very mediocre, and if you want to do this, just go play negative and try to go over the top of these guys. I will say, one of the things that should really stick out about all the decks we've seen so far, except the Thanos one, but mostly including that too, it's really just kind of a super scroll, is a general lack of interaction, which makes this metagame a very good one for something like Mr. Negative, trying to go over the top of it. Another very good card right now, if you're trying to deal with these guys, is Lady Deathstrike. Extremely powerful in her own right, but much better when people are trying to scam Iron Men out of you or relying on Ravonna Renslayers and Mr. Fantastics on the board. These are the big dangers to decks like this right now. And not necessarily like this, but really to all Goliath decks. Every Goliath deck shares a bit of a common weakness to anti-ongoing tech and to Lady Deathstrike. And that is going to be true kind of regardless at this point. Like, there's just going to be a lot of things that are good into this kind of deck. So on the whole, I think all of these decks are like kind of decent. These are all playable, acceptable decks. Goliath is definitely a card that if any of these decks get better, it's going to be in that version of it. I also think that it's important to note that the metagame is very hostile to ongoings right now. And that is a bad thing for anyone who's looking to play Goliath this very second. I've already seen a lot of complaints about trying to play the new card in an extremely hostile meta. I don't think that's a coincidence. There's a lot of Enchantress, a lot of Super Scroll, a lot of people who are prepared for this card right now. What I'm saying is, right now, I think it's hitting low, but at baseline, Goliath goes in every ongoing deck. So, should you buy Goliath? My instinct is that this is a card that is worth owning. Now, I'm a little bit biased. I really love that half man, half amazing deck. It's one of my favorite decks to play. I really love playing Thanos stuff. I will say, the one thing that gives me pause when it comes to Goliath is that I think, unlike something like Wiccan, who is mandatory for the decks that it goes in, I think you could very easily budget replace Goliath with something like a Lizard or a Gorgon and not feel too bad about it. I think you'll lose some games, but you'll win some games. There's another important Goliath dynamic that's worth talking about here, and it's that Goliath sort of lets you lose. Basically, what Goliath does is, like, Enchantress now wins 2 lanes because everything they Enchantress takes a point off Goliath too. That interaction is really unpleasant, and I'm not saying I would rather run Lizard because at least if they Enchantress that, it's good for you. But it is something that did genuinely occur to me given how hostile the metagame is right now. It's very, very hostile and very, very, very focused on beating this kind of stuff. Long term, I kind of expect these decks to be like tier 2, high tier 2, low tier 1. At least some of these Goliath decks are probably just going to be around. They're just good. And once people stop hyper-focusing on it, I think they'll have plenty of room to breathe. These are just solid decks. He is a solid card, and he's just sort of a rate monster that makes a ton of sense. There is another dynamic that's worth talking about. His power is not getting updated in hand right now. I have no idea why, but I really hope they fix that soon. On the whole, I think that Goliath is somewhere in the range of like a 3.5 out of 5, if I were to give it a star rating. I think that is indicative of something that is like staple-ish, but not as required as the true build-arounds. And I guess that brings us to the elephant in the room, which is you're probably not playing any Goliath deck without Sam Wilson. Like, that's just how it is. This is a free point of power for Goliath. You're just like, you just can't do it. He goes with Sam Wilson. That's the thing that he does. It's impossible to avoid, I think. All right, y'all. Thank you so much for watching that video. As always, I have been KMBest. You have been phenomenal. I think we'll stop in tomorrow and check on the first maybe underperforming season pass card of the last God knows how long. Is it finally time for the game to not be pay to win? Probably not, given I just said you kind of need Sam Wilson to play Goliath, but, we can pretend. As always, I've been KMBest and you have been phenomenal. I will see you in the next one.